They told me the guest house I built with my entire life savings was mine. They smiled, thanked me, and then handed it to my sister instead. No warning, no apology, just betrayal. I walked away that day without a word, but inside something broke. For years I had put my family first. I'd sacrificed my dreams, my money, and my time. And this was how they repaid me. But what they didn't know was, you can only push someone so far before they stop caring. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I let them keep their precious house, and all the problems that came with it. And when karma came knocking, they weren't ready for the price. You're about to hear a story of betrayal, revenge, and the kind of justice money can't buy. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't destroying someone's life, it's watching them destroy it themselves. And trust me, my family learned that lesson the hard way. So sit back, because this story, it doesn't end the way they think it does. I used to believe that hard work always paid off. I believed that if I was patient, responsible, and careful, life would eventually reward me. I believed that family would never betray me. I was wrong. For 10 years, I worked long hours at a job I didn't even love. I skipped vacations. I skipped expensive dinners. I skipped every little luxury my friends enjoyed. I was saving for one thing, a home of my own. I watched the housing market get worse every year. Prices kept climbing. Even the smallest homes were out of reach. I was starting to lose hope. Then my parents came to me with an idea. We've got a big backyard, my mom said one night over dinner. Why don't you build a small place here, she added. You'd have your own home and you'd never need to pay rent again, my dad said. I hesitated at first. It sounded too good to be true. But they looked so genuine. They made it sound like they wanted to help me. I wanted to believe them. I started drawing up plans. I met with contractors. I spent hours comparing materials and designs. I wanted it perfect. I worked side by side with the builders whenever I could. I picked the kitchen tiles. I chose the flooring and the paint colors. I even selected the exact style of the front door. My parents came out to check on the progress often. They'd smile and tell me how beautiful it was going to be. They told me I was making a smart investment. They said they were proud of me. It took 8 months to finish. 8 long months of saving, planning, and working late into the night. When it was done, I was exhausted but happy. I had spent every single dollar of my savings, but I didn't care. I finally had a home. Move-in day arrived. I was so excited I barely slept the night before. I packed my things and walked to the new house with my keys in hand. But before I could step inside, my dad came out holding a set of keys. His expression was serious. Mark and his family will be living here, he said. I froze. Mark was my cousin. He and his wife had 2 kids. But this was my house. I had paid for it. Mark needs it more right now, my dad continued. He lost his job and they have nowhere to go. My mom stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. Sweetheart, you're young and single, she said. You can find another place. But Mark and Rachel need this now. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They had decided this a long time ago. I realized they never intended for me to live here. I reminded them that I paid for everything. I said it slowly, hoping they'd hear how wrong this was. But my mom just sighed. It's still part of the family, she said. And family helps family. Mark walked up then. He smiled like he'd just been handed a gift. Thanks for letting us stay here, cuz, he said. I didn't let you stay here, I replied coldly. They ignored me. They acted like my feelings didn't matter. They acted like my money didn't matter. My hands were shaking. I wanted to shout. I wanted to demand they give me the keys and leave. But I didn't. I turned around and walked away. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in front of them. I didn't beg. I left the home I built behind me. I didn't even know where I would sleep that night. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. I would not lift a finger to help them again. I found a cheap room to rent across town. It was small and plain, but it was mine. I didn't tell my parents where it was. I didn't give them my new address. They didn't call me that first week. I think they expected me to come crawling back. I think they thought I'd agreed to share the house with Mark. They were wrong. I stayed quiet. I didn't visit. I didn't ask how things were going. And deep down, I remembered something important. Near the end of construction, my dad had tried to save money. He hired one of his friends to finish the plumbing and electrical work. I told him it was a bad idea. He laughed and said I worried too much. Let him do it, he said. Why waste money on expensive contractors, he said. I dropped it then because I thought I'd be the one living there. If something broke, I'd fix it myself. But now it wasn't my problem anymore. 7 days after I walked away, my phone started ringing. It was my mom. I didn't answer. Then my dad called. Then Mark. I ignored them all. Finally, a voicemail came through from my mom. Her voice was tight and rushed. Something's wrong with the house, she said. The plumbing is leaking into the walls. The power keeps going out. And there's a horrible smell in the kitchen. I played it twice. I felt no guilt. They had taken my home from me. Now they could deal with the consequences. I deleted my mom's voicemail and put my phone face down. I didn't want to hear another word about that house. They had made their choice. Now they had to live with it. That night, I went to bed without calling anyone back. I slept better than I had in months. I didn't feel like the bad guy. I felt like someone who finally learned her lesson about trust. The next morning my phone buzzed again. It was a message from my sister. She said Mom and Dad were furious at me. She said I was being selfish for not helping them. I didn't reply. A few hours later my dad sent me a text. It said, "Call me right now." I didn't. I left my phone on silent and went to work. When I came home that evening I had 12 missed calls. 5 from my mom. 4 from my dad. 3 from Mark. I knew they weren't calling to apologize. I made myself dinner and turned on the TV. I didn't check my messages until the next morning. That's when I saw another voicemail from my mom. This time her voice was shaking. She said the leak had gotten worse. Water was pouring into the guest bedroom ceiling. The smell in the kitchen was unbearable. The electrician said the wiring was unsafe. I almost laughed. These were all the things I had warned them about during construction. But they didn't want to listen to me then. Why should I rush to save them now? Later that day, Mark himself called me. I answered out of curiosity. He started with fake concern. "Hey, how have you been?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said flatly. He sighed and got to the point. He said they needed me to come over and help fix the problems. He reminded me that I had chosen most of the materials. He said it was my responsibility to make sure everything worked. I told him I wasn't responsible for a house I didn't live in. He got angry. He said I was acting petty. I hung up. 2 days later, my dad showed up at my rented apartment. I didn't let him inside. He stood in the doorway and started lecturing me. He said family sticks together. He said I was abandoning them. He said Mark's kids were suffering because of me. I asked him if he remembered the day he gave my keys to Mark. He shifted uncomfortably. I asked him if he remembered telling me to go find another place to live. He looked away. Then I told him something I'd been waiting to say. "You made your choice," I said. "Now live with it." He didn't say another word. He turned and walked down the hallway. I closed the door before he could change his mind. That weekend my sister texted me again. She said Mom had been crying every night. She said Dad's blood pressure was high from stress. She begged me to at least talk to them. I didn't reply. On Monday morning, I stopped by a cafe before work. While I waited for my coffee, I overheard two women talking at the next table. One of them mentioned my parents' address. I froze. Then she said something about the smell of mold coming from the backyard. I turned my head slightly and saw she was talking to a neighbor. I didn't join their conversation, but I smiled into my coffee cup. I knew exactly what was happening. The water damage was worse than they'd told me. Mold had started growing inside the walls. That night, my mom left another voicemail. Her voice was tired and hoarse. She said the kids had developed coughs. She said they had to move out temporarily while repairs were done. She said they couldn't afford the repairs. I sat in silence after hearing it. For years, I had been the fixer in the family. Whenever someone had a problem, I was the first call. I gave money. I gave time. I gave energy. And this is how they repaid me. I decided then that I wouldn't step foot in that house ever again. Not to visit. Not to help. Not even to see the damage. A few more days passed. My phone stayed quiet. I think they were too embarrassed to keep calling. Then on Friday evening I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "We can't do this without you." I knew it was from Mark. I ignored it. 5 minutes later he called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. He said, "I'm sorry for how things happened." He said, "Please, can you at least come talk to us?" I didn't trust him. But something inside me wanted to hear what they would say in person. Not because I was going to help. Because I wanted to see how desperate they had become. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I parked across the street. The backyard looked terrible from the outside. There were piles of broken drywall leaning against the fence. The grass was brown from lack of care. My dad came out first. He looked older than I remembered. My mom followed, her eyes red and puffy. Mark stood behind them, holding his two kids. They all looked miserable. They asked me to come inside. I stepped through the doorway and immediately smelled the dampness. The air was thick and musty. The walls in the kitchen were discolored. Parts of the ceiling were gone, exposing wooden beams. My mom started crying as she explained the repairs they needed. She said insurance wouldn't cover it because of the unlicensed work. She said they had no savings left. My dad admitted they were in debt from trying to fix small things themselves. They all looked at me like I was their last hope. And maybe in the past I would have been. But not anymore. I stayed quiet for a long moment. Then I said, "I warned you about this. I told you not to cut corners. And I told you not to take my house away from me." My dad's jaw tightened. Mark looked at the floor. My mom's tears kept falling. I didn't feel sorry for them. I felt free. I stood there in their ruined kitchen, looking at the mess they had created. My dad's shoulders were slumped. My mom kept wiping her tears with the sleeve of her sweater. Mark avoided my eyes. I could feel their silent expectation, like they thought I would suddenly melt and say I'd help. But I didn't. I had spent years being the one who fixed their problems. And every time I did, it cost me a piece of myself. I walked slowly to the living room. The floor creaked under my feet. There were stains on the carpet, dark and irregular. The once bright curtains were dull and stiff from damp air. The whole place felt lifeless. My mom followed me. Her voice trembled as she spoke. She said, "You know we didn't mean to hurt you." I turned to her and looked her in the eye. I said, "You didn't just hurt me. You betrayed me." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue. But she said nothing. My dad stepped in, his voice low. He said we made a mistake. He said we thought Mark needed it more. He said we thought you would understand. I almost laughed. I said, you thought I would understand giving away the home I built with my own money? My dad's face flushed with shame. Mark shifted his weight like he wanted to disappear. I walked toward the door. My mom asked where I was going. I said home. She asked to your apartment. I nodded. And then I added, the place that actually belongs to me. As I reached the doorway, Mark spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, almost pleading. He said, please just tell us what to do. I turned back to face him. I said, live with the choices you made. I stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sun was rising, painting the sky in pale orange and gold. It felt like the first sunrise in years that wasn't clouded by their drama. I walked to my car and drove away without looking back. That night, I thought about posting my side of the story online. I knew people in the neighborhood had already heard bits and pieces. But I wanted the truth out there. I opened my laptop and began typing. I wrote about how I had used my savings to build a guest house. I wrote about the promises they made. I wrote about how, the day it was finished, they handed it to my sister's husband. I wrote about the betrayal, the hurt, and the silence that followed. I wrote about how the house started falling apart because of their own shortcuts. And I wrote about how they had come crawling back to me when it all went wrong. When I finished, I read it twice. It was raw. It was honest. It was the truth. I hit post. Within an hour, people began commenting. Some were shocked. Some were angry on my behalf. Some said they had always suspected my family favored my sister. A few even shared their own stories of betrayal. By the next morning, the post had been shared over 200 times. I wasn't trying to embarrass my family. I was just tired of carrying the weight of their choices alone. Later that afternoon, my mom called. Her voice was sharp, almost panicked. She said, how could you put our business online? I said, you put my life on the curb the day you gave away my home. She hung up without another word. A few days later, Mark sent me a long text. He said people were treating them differently. He said the neighbors had stopped inviting them over. He said the kids were asking why no one came to play anymore. He said it was my fault. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. They had written their own ending the moment they decided my dreams were disposable. 2 weeks passed without contact. I started noticing changes in myself. I laughed more. I slept better. My apartment felt warmer, like a safe place instead of a temporary stop. I realized I had been living under their shadow for too long. One Sunday morning, I went to the farmer's market. As I browsed the stalls, I ran into Mrs. Jensen, an old neighbor from my parents' street. She hugged me tightly. She said, good for you for standing your ground. She said, people like them never learn unless someone walks away. Her words stayed with me all day. She was right. If I had gone back to help them, they would have learned nothing. They would have gone right back to treating me like the backup plan. That evening, I got a final voicemail from my dad. He sounded tired. He said, I guess this is goodbye for a while. He said, we'll try to figure things out on our own. He didn't apologize, but there was something in his tone that almost sounded like respect. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I let the silence grow. And for the first time in my life, that silence felt like peace. I woke up to soft sunlight streaming through my window. The world outside was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, my heart felt light. I stretched, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, and realized something important. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally living. In the weeks since I had walked away, I had discovered a part of myself I didn't know existed. A part that could stand on its own. A part that could dream again. And a part that no longer needed approval from people who had never truly valued me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at my small kitchen table. The aroma filled the air, comforting and familiar. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It hadn't been easy. It had been raw, painful, and full of nights where I cried into my pillow. But every tear had been worth it. That morning, I opened my email and found a message from a real estate agent. She had a small cottage listed just outside the city, surrounded by gardens and tall trees. It wasn't grand. It wasn't expensive. But it was mine if I wanted it. I drove out to see it that afternoon. The air smelled of wildflowers and fresh earth. The cottage had peeling paint, but the windows shone in the sunlight. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The wooden floors creaked softly under my feet, like they were greeting me. The kitchen was small but full of light. In that moment I knew. This was home. I signed the papers 2 weeks later. The keys felt warm in my palm, like they had been waiting for me all along. I stood in the doorway, looking out at the world beyond my front steps. I felt free. Meanwhile, the silence from my parents and Mark continued. I heard bits of gossip from neighbors. They said the guest house was now unlivable. They said the roof had caved in during a storm. They said the repairs were too expensive. They said my family was thinking of selling it for a fraction of its value. I didn't feel joy at their struggles. But I also didn't feel guilty. They had chosen their path. And I had chosen mine. One afternoon I was planting roses in my front yard when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. It said, "I hope you're happy now." I stared at the screen for a long time. And then I typed back yes. I hit send and put my phone away. The sun was warm on my face. The soil was soft in my hands. And my heart was light. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. The stars were bright above me, scattered like diamonds across the sky. I thought about all the years I had spent giving pieces of myself away. I thought about how I had been told to be the bigger person, to forgive, to forget. And I realized something important. I didn't need to forgive to move on. I just needed to let go. Letting go didn't mean I approved of what they had done. It didn't mean I wanted them back in my life. It meant I had decided their choices would no longer control my happiness. As the days turned into months, my life began to bloom like the flowers in my garden. I hosted dinners for friends who felt more like family than blood ever had. I filled my home with laughter, music, and light. I found joy in the smallest moments, the first sip of morning coffee, the feel of fresh sheets, the sound of rain on the roof. Sometimes when I passed by my old neighborhood, I would glance at my parents' house. It looked smaller now, almost fragile. The walls seemed tired, the paint faded. And I realized it was a perfect reflection of them, still standing but slowly crumbling under the weight of their own choices. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I just kept driving. Because I had built something new. Something no one could take from me. A life rooted in self-respect, not in other people's expectations. And that was worth more than any house, any apology, any promise. In the end, the home they stole from me had only been walls and a roof. But the home I built for myself was made of freedom, peace, and self-worth. And that was something no one could ever hand to my sister, no matter how much they favored her. I finished my tea and took one last look at the stars. They seemed brighter than I had ever seen them. Maybe it was because I finally had the courage to see the beauty in my own life. Or maybe it was because I knew deep down that I had chosen myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.